I know it was back 2004 when two producers slipped this comic book into your bag. It took you 8 weeks to actually get around to reading it. But when you did read it, for me, it's almost like Kung Fu Hustle with Michael Cera. That wonderful kind of mix of wonderful manga madness, and yet there's a sort of an innocent right through the middle of it all, doesn't quite know what's going on. Was it very instant for you when you read it? Did you kind of feel, could you see yourself making this, or is there a million things you have to read and think you might make this?
No, I don't really read too much other stuff that gets sent my way. But for some reason, I read this one and I could see straight away why they'd given it to me. Actually, I think I read the first book, Kung Fu Hustle hadn't come out yet, actually, thinking about that. So it was just after Shaun of the Dead. And just reading it, if anything, it actually reminded me a bit of Spaced. And, you know, so it was the chance to... Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead, even though they have really ridiculous things in them, they both take place in a real world where, like, people die and don't come back. And this was something that was interesting to me because it's both highly relatable, like it takes place in, you know, it's essentially about a bunch of people in their teens and early 20s. But it's got a sort of a slightly magical feel to it in a world where anything can happen.
Well, for me, that notion with especially pop culture, kind of rich comic book adaptations, for every Kick-Ass, there's at least 10 Tank Girls. They are difficult to get right because you're trying to capture an essence of another medium, which is often very hip and very cool, but you got to play to a large audience. I don't know whether you sat down with Brian Lee O'Malley, the writer of the comic book, or whether there was a lot of sort of debate about, well, how do we go with this? Do we literally go with what the comic book gives us in regard to graphics, or do we, you know, make it softer? Do we go over here? Was it a long process, or was it very instinctive?
I think it was pretty instinctive. I don't know what a straighter version of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World would be. When people sort of have asked me, you know, how far is too far? And I was thinking, I don't really know how to soft pedal a film like this. I think it's, especially when you read the source material and, you know, and what it's about and the tone of it, it felt like it was, you know, a license to let my imagination run riot a little bit. And I think that's what's kind of like, that's fun and fresh about it. Like, you know, when people have asked me that, I kind of pondered thinking, I don't know what a straight version of Scott Pilgrim would be. The whole, you know, like, raison d'etre of the whole piece is that you're essentially seeing the film that's playing in Scott Pilgrim's head. And that Scott Pilgrim is a character in his early 20s who has grown up on Saturday morning cartoons and comic books and video games and probably too much sugary product. And you're watching kind of like how he would like to live his life. You know, there's even a
sounds like you, really.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I definitely was that kid at school.
Right.
When I was at school, comprehensive, I was short-sighted. I didn't know I was short-sighted until I was 20. And as such, I would frequently look out of the window, like it's in classes, because I couldn't see the blackboard properly. And, you know, like a lot of my doodles and stuff, I tried to sort of recapture that kind of like sort of feeling making the film, because I remember as a teenager sort of like having lots of, you know, kind of crazy wish fulfillment, like daydreams and doodling kind of like rock bands, not unlike Sex Bomb on my school book. Even like the look of Sex Bomb when they're playing and they have kind of lightning bolts and jagged lines coming out. You know, I would describe it to the animators. I said it should look like a 14-year-old's idea of a rock band. And so, you know, Scott Pilgrim as a character is 22, but sometimes he acts like a 12-year-old. And I can definitely empathize with him in that when I was young and dating, I was a bit like a bird distracted by whatever piece of foil was around. So Scott Pilgrim is an interesting character because like he's quite a flawed hero. You get the feeling that he kind of like, he would get distracted by like sort of a burrito as much as he would the next kind of gorgeous girl that walks past him.
Well, with Brian Lee O'Malley, he'd written the first book in 2004. There's 6 books altogether. The last one came out in July, and he was writing the last one as you made the film. And I'm wondering whether there was a lot of kind of back and forth. I know there was just generally about what was going to happen in regard to the story, but just even with the characters, they're so wonderful. Like when it comes to Kim Pine, I think Alison Pill plays her, the drummer. She looks like a cross between Ellen Page and a very pissed off leprechaun. There's great imagery going on all the time, or or Ramona's like Stephanie from Lazy Town, all grown up and on roller skates. There's that sort of
I don't know what Lazy Town is.
It's a kids little afternoon kind of kids thing
Oh,
on
okay.
BBC, but very wild and very crazy. And but those kind of reference points when you've got to basically bring what you want to feel is the representation. I don't know whether there was a lot of back and forth saying, well, I've got this idea for this character, and what if we went this way a little bit on this, or was there a lot of that kind of?
Yes and no. It was a pretty organic process. I mean, we had a structure worked out as far back as 2005, and then it was about kind of trying to. We kept rewriting to bring more of the new material as it kind of came together. Brian, when we first started writing, we had 3 books, and we had the rough outlines of the other 3 books. And then it kept developing right up till shooting. So even the 6th book, we knew how it was going to end. And then we even did a couple of extra little reshoots that, that reflected like some of the final sort of passages of book 6. So it's been a good organic process. There were times that we worked in tandem. There were times when Brian took some lines out of the screenplay and put them in the books, which was very sort of pleasing, So there's a couple of lines in volume 4 and 5 that come from our screenplay,
Well, I was actually thinking it might have been an emotional shoot for you on some level, because there you are, you've made the wonderful Space and the fantastic Shaun of the Dead and the wonderful Hot Fuzz, and now for the first time when you do a wonderful scene and you have a laugh and you turn to put your arm around Simon and Nick to share the moment. They're not here, they're in Mexico making their road movie. Was there a part of you that felt, obviously it's a healthy thing to go out, everyone should be kind of working with other people all the time, but that notion that you have this special kind of bond, did it feel at times a little bit odd that this was the first time you were going through an entire production without possibly the people that you most associate with such things?
No, because the cast were amazing, and we all got on like a house on fire, and 50% of the cast are people that I was already fans of. The other 50% are people that were eye-opening discoveries to me. They're all amazingly fun to work with, so it wasn't a case that I kind of ever thought, I wish Simon and Nick were here, because I was surrounded by an embarrassment of riches from the finest young comedy actors in Hollywood, and also working with an amazing crew, half of which are people that worked on Hot Fuzz and Shaun and Survival Hackers Space, and then the other half are amazing world-class professionals, working with for the first time Nigel Godrich and Bill Pope and Brad Allen. So. And the thing is, I think sometimes some fans, would like me, Simon and Nick, to be handcuffed together forever. But, for every film that I make once every 3 years, they get off to, Simon gets to go off and do Star Trek and Mission Impossible and Tintin. And so
he's a slut.
Yeah, so yeah. I think I'm allowed to sleep around as well.
Rock and roll. Very nice to talk to you, sir, getting the friendly finger.
Yeah, wait, seriously, man. Cool.